Hi, everyone. Brad Ward here, Director of Community Philanthropy for the Council on Foundations. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar. As you can see on the screen in front of you, here's just a few housekeeping tips as we go through today's webinar in case you have any questions about how to access some help or get a question answered. We will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation. You can submit those as they come to you by utilizing the question box there on the right hand of the GoToWebinar feature. Just submit those questions as they come to you, and we'll do our best to get those worked into the conversation. At this time, we're going to get started with our continued learning, trends in professional development for community foundations. I'd like to start by introducing the fine folks who were kind enough to join me today. As I mentioned, I'm the Director of Community Philanthropy for the Council, and I'm glad to be joining you here today from New Orleans as I'm participating in today's AdNet conference here in New Orleans. And so we had about 200 community foundation professionals who focus largely in the development space coming together for a few days of shared learning and networking. So very timely to be having this conversation as the council is here participating in another professional development. I'd like to provide a disclaimer, just as our legal team often does when they do webinars. My disclaimer is a little bit different. Yes, this is all about learning about what is trending in the professional development field, and we're going to do our best to give you a good overview of that. But like anything, the disclaimer is we're probably going to be promoting the heck out of the things that we love and the things that we work hard on to try to help educate our field. And so to keep that in check, I have my colleague Daniela joining me today, who is the program manager for professional development, and I'm going to let her introduce one of her faculty for the Community Foundations Excellence courses who's joining us online. Daniela?
Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you today. I wanted to introduce Judy Josted. She is my Wonder Woman, and she's the Executive Director of the Parkersburg Area Community Foundation and Regional Affiliates. She's been there since 1999. She knows everything, and she has led the organization through a period of rapid growth. When she started in 1999, the total assets for the organization was 7.6, and it's at 38 million today. And so
45.
She's a total rock star. And she is also has heavily participated with the Council on Foundations. She served 2 terms at the National Council on Foundations Community Foundations Leadership Team. And she's a faculty with the Community Foundation Fundamentals course and other courses. And she also serves on the CF Insights Advisory Board of the Foundation Center, now Candid. And so we love collaborating with her and love having you in the webinar.
Thank you, Daniela. And I also wanted to introduce another colleague here as a presenter, and I'm thrilled to have Steve Alley. For many of you who know Steve, he's a managing partner with Ekstrom, Alley, Clance and Associates. But I have had the pleasure of learning from Steve throughout my career, thanks to just the exceptional personal experience that he's had with many different community foundations in the state of Indiana, and before he moved on to the community foundation there for Southern Arizona. And Steve brings a wealth of experience and knowledge as he works with many community foundations across the country on things as diverse as their strategic plans, to their staffing plans, to their board governance development, and so forth. And so I think we've put together a very robust team here who really knows the landscape of community foundations and in particular the landscape for professional development. So Steve, thank you for joining. Judy and Daniela, appreciate having each of you on here. I think just to jump right in and not waste any time, just wanted to give you a highlight or a high-level perspective of what we are attempting to achieve with today's call. We wanted to make sure that you were familiar with the trends and challenges that are facing the community foundation field and how that gets enveloped into particular training and professional development opportunities. And so that's where Daniela, Judy, and Steve will give us an assessment of what is out there for you to participate in. How can you get support for yourself and for your team? And then the last thing we'll do is we'll just try to reinforce why this is important. How is professional development incorporated into your budgets? How is it talked about with the governing board and the staff? Because like anything, it is an investment and it requires some resources. So we'll move through to the next slide in terms of the agenda. As I said, I'll try to give a very quick landscape assessment. We'll move into assessing the actual professional development offerings. We'll reinforce this learning journey through some advice, stories, and trends that you can use. And then we'll try to address any common issues or questions that you may have. With that, I just wanted to give some practical background, sort of what helps inform and shape the council's approach to professional development. And I have to say that when I joined the council 3 years ago, after having been in the field a decade prior to that, in running a community foundation, I was overwhelmed by what I didn't know, even though I had spent so much time in the field and was an active council member. I still just had a limited perspective of what is out there. And then since then, what I've gained by being with the council is just a remarkable sense of what is really going on in all of your shops across the country. And I get that by looking at what is transpiring on the Philanthropy Exchange. This is a listserv that many of you use, and there's plenty of other ones out there that we're able to subscribe to, like Grant Makers for Effective Organizations and other ones that are out there that gives us a landscape. But just at the council alone, we deal with about 1,000 RFIs, and those are requests for information that are going through that peer-to-peer exchange. We deal with another 2,000 requests for information, predominantly from community foundations, through our legal team, our research, through myself, and through other staff members who are fielding your questions. And these questions are just very simple. Sometimes they're very complex. Sometimes they're very straightforward, where you're looking for detailed information. You've got a challenging gift that you're accepting, or you're trying to figure out how to write this fund agreement or make this grant agreement work. And those are important. Those are important insights to what is really keeping you up at night and what's keeping you busy. And so the last thing I'll mention is that we had about a year ago, CF Leads and CF Insights, two community foundations serving infrastructure groups, tried to assess what's going on in the field. As the council was going through its dramatic changes where we saw the loss of the fall conference and the changes to the leadership structure and an increase in the dues that caused it to be a challenge for many of you to be part of the membership fold, we realized that the landscape was shifting around us. It was causing the council to assess its own business model, and we got some things right and some things majorly wrong. And so obviously we're working through those now with the arrival of our new CEO, Kathleen Enright. But what this report showed us is that there are over 300 organizations out there trying to serve community foundations. That's a lot of organizations to have to try to figure out where to turn and how to navigate. And so what the council has really tried to do since then is to ensure, at least while I've been here, and something that's been important to me, is figure out how do we serve in a concierge level to give you a sense of how to navigate all of those. And I'm proud to say that the council was still ranking very heavily, at the top of many of those categories that they were assessing. But the reality is there's a lot that you can gain access to. And so to help get a little bit of a flavor of that, that's where Judy and Steve are going to help us here later in the program. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't, flag that national standards, the accreditation process, where over 500 community foundations participate, that gives you a pretty good assessment of what are people struggling with, where are they really navigating successfully with policies and procedures that support the work that they do, and what are some of the most challenging pieces to actually implement, whether it be the active funds policy for donor advised funds. How does that really get accepted by the donors, after all, who you're working with? So we'll move on to the next slide and just say that just in my short time of being at the council, I arrived in 2016, and I worked very closely with folks like Daniela and our legal team and others to try to relaunch professional development in a more aggressive manner for community foundations. And as you can see, I'm very pleased with the numbers that we've been able to train since then. Over 350 have participated in our Community Foundations Excellence courses. 200 plus professionals have attended legal matters workshops, and the list goes on. Thousands of you have joined us in virtual learning. So that's just all I'll say about that. We'll let Daniela get into that more later. let's shift gears and let's jump into what in the heck is keeping all of you up at night, and what is keeping this work so interesting and so dynamic. And we've got over 105 years under our belt as a field, and it is certainly remains interesting. So we'll go to the next slide and just take a look at how this has changed just in the short period. When I was trying to think about my time entering the field, what has changed, it reminded me of coffee. Coffee seemed to be, ordering a coffee never really seemed complicated, whether that be a few decades ago. And as you can see on this slide, today we have all kinds of choices. And the same is true for us as community foundations. The role and the responsibilities have dramatically shifted. So too has the way in which we've engaged with our donors. If you think about the era of dead donors, as we often refer to it, where we were really just dealing with trust gifts and gifts after someone had passed, that is not the case today. And in fact, the next century is going to continue to push us into new paradigms for how we raise and how we deploy the capital. It's going to require new partnerships that are going to be far more requiring understanding of the private and the public sector. And those investment vehicles are far more complex, requiring additional partners to get the work done successfully. And then just the notion of engaging the public. We have always had a history of engaging the public well in our grant making and through our donor base, but that responsibility is expanding and growing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. The next slide really just starts to address what are the trends that are most pressing right now. And as you can see, this list is going to keep growing, and we couldn't even hit them all. But at a very high level, many of you are continuing to address community leadership, and in particular, the trade-offs that come with it. The neutral, unbiased position that we had requires you taking a stance. It requires you using a different set of your resources and deploying your assets differently. It's not just your financial assets, it's now your reputational and your fiscal and your human resources that are at play, and so many others. Lots of community foundations have been called to respond to crisis in their community. So you're dealing with disasters that are something that is very difficult to prepare for, but even more challenging to implement and then recover from. Local leadership is just, there's new expectations, evolving challenges that many of you are addressing. And I'll mention just on this slide, the notion of 94% of our grants are still domestic. But the question is just to what degree is that making a difference? How is it being implemented? What are we doing to check for the efficiency and the effectiveness of our grant dollars? And then how do we deal with the growing international grant making that many donors are interested in, because we're a much more global and mobile society? And certainly donor advised funds continue to eat up a significant portion of our learning in terms of the philanthropic advising that we often find ourselves doing with donors today, because it's much more personalized, and you're working with multiple generations of donors in some cases, and you're working with a range of advisors and engaged folks. So we'll move on to the next slide, and this is just to remind you that the shift has already happened, and shift happens whether you like it or not. And in this reality, if you haven't tackled the first 3 bulleted points, we probably need to have a much longer conversation, because the field has already moved beyond just being a transactional institution model, and is much more focused on the community. That's the same true in terms of you're not just managing assets. It's no longer just about assets under management. It really is about how you're deploying resources to the community through your own staffing models. And the last one there is that I'll get to in terms of the first 3 is this idea that it takes far more coordinated impact, and collaboration is hard work. It requires a common agenda that is difficult to settle on, and there's just much more interdependence than prior to. And the 4th bullet point is something that I believe it's safe to say we are still grappling with, and that is the change in donor behaviors and change in technologies that are enabling some of that. We're going to move forward just so we can give you a landscape. Some of the other challenges that we often hear about from all of you is the competing expectations you have between how the board measures success, how the staff looks for it, and even what our policymakers are expecting of us. The next slide reminds us that there are a lot of fund types at the Community Foundation, and it's difficult for you to get all board members. Go ahead and click forward one more time, Russ, and you'll see just a list of items there on this slide. If you could advance it one more time. There you go. Just the knowledge that is required in looking at all the different fund types that you all are managing, recognizing how you administrate them. A lot of the training deals with just getting that business model correctly and actually administrating and operating these funds appropriately. And the next slide is just a reminder of the immense roles that you can play and the different types. And there are certainly organizations like CF Leads that has devoted its entire curriculum and its entire purpose to helping you think about how you deploy these various roles and responsibilities. In the next slide, it's just a reminder that this work is broad, this work is not focused, and it means we are constantly shifting and evolving. But it also demonstrates the depth in which we can have an impact. And you can likely see yourself in one or more of these boxes that you see. Next slide just reminds us that what we see often in our legal inquiries is the notion of how do we properly accept gifts. And so there are some trainings that are specific to planned giving and what the profiles of donors look like and how you can utilize all these different tools to increase your revenue for grant making and for legacies. The next slide is just the last one that I'm going to flag here for you. And that's just to remind you that there's lots of common elements among all community foundations. And it's important to recognize that we have a lot to learn from one another. Majority of community foundations are place-based. They're geographically focused. They manage permanent endowments. They deal with multiple relationships. And they have connections that go across the grant making and the grantee portfolio. So we have a lot to learn from each other. And then if we click forward one more, you'll see that we're very different from many other charities. And so as much as we can benefit from engaging with our sector and learning from private and public and corporate foundations, as well as the nonprofit sector, there are still some things that are unique to community foundations that we have in our field. And those are things like how to do advocacy, because we have the trust. We have the ability to position ourselves very effectively to create much greater influence than our philanthropic dollars could ever support. We know our community best, and we're certainly able to pivot quickly and we're able to be versatile in what we support. And the last thing I'll remind us is that's pretty unique is that we often have community in our name. And with that, it exists for the benefit of all. And so with that, I'm just going to pause and I'm going to ask Steve Alley if he thinks I missed anything or if he has any comments based on his work with the field on some of these issues. Steve?
Thanks, Brad, and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the U.S. today. Thank you for joining us. Just a couple of things that we run into quite frequently as we're working both with staff and board members, and in my own experience, having been at 3 different community foundations, I think one of the things that people underestimate is the challenge of how complicated this work is. And I mean, particularly on the board side, and I've even had that conversation with new staff. Once hired a staff member from United Way who had said, you know, I thought I knew what you guys did until I got here. I never realized how complicated this work is. And to me, it's one of the reasons why professional development is so important, is to help connect those dots within the organization, to help make sure that people understand how a new donor, a new gift, a new volunteer, a new grant, a new leadership opportunity really does change the nature of the organization and how that works. I think the second thing that we see most frequently, and you talk about this, you know, kind of moving in new directions, Brad, you talked a little bit about that, is that oftentimes when a community foundation moves in a new direction, it needs to understand its business model. It needs to understand how that needs to shift along with the work and how to bring people along. Again, I guess it's just another way of saying it is complicated and it's not simple work. And while we can move quickly and nimbly as organizations, doing that without kind of thinking through what might be on the other side can cause some difficulties in terms of how to be able to make this happen. I think,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One other, the last thing I wanted to add was that I think one of the things that was really, to me, was really interesting about what you said, and we've run into many, many times, is that, it used to be that the Community Foundation was kind of the only game in town for a lot of the work that it does. Well, now virtually everything the foundation does can be done by another organization in some way. And donors are far less concerned with, many donors are far less concerned about the what, but the how it gets done, what kind of organization they're working with, and more concerned with what's the impact that I'm trying to create. So being able to think through what that value added looks like for the foundation, understanding what that is, what your unique value is to your donors and your community, is also a critical part of that. And again, part of this is about connecting the dots and understanding what it is that you need to know, and what the organization itself, what knowledge the organization itself needs to know in order to be able to get there. Brad, let's turn it back.
What I did in 15 minutes, Steve, as per usual, was able to do in 3. So thank you. I always appreciate your ability to synthesize this. So with that, I want to turn it over to Daniela, who is going to lead just an assessment of what's going on in the Community Foundation professional development world. Daniela?
Thanks, Brad. Next slide, please. So we have a set of programming that is specifically for community foundations, so I'm going to start there. This is a list of our Community Foundation Excellence suite of courses. These courses focus on helping community foundation staff, board members, and volunteers master the unique aspects of community foundation field. Our main and most popular course is the CFE Fundamentals course. It's a course that is sort of geared for folks that are in the early stages of their careers, as well as more experienced staff who are seeking refresher on the different topics, or what are the new trends in the field, as well as staff transitioning into different roles within a foundation. It is applicable for all types of roles within the foundation, and in fact, one of the richer aspects of this course is the diversity, not only in type of roles, but in experiences, geographies, size of foundations. That makes the course really rich in content and in examples about how diverse the field really is. The course is usually about 45 people in the room, and in addition to sort of the vast content that we're able to provide in this 2-day course, you also get to network and make meaningful connections with folks in the room. We also offer a finance course. This one is like a 1.5 or 2.0. This is for folks that work within the finance departments in their respective organizations, and it provides an understanding of the complicated aspects of community foundation finances. It is a 2-day course, and it goes, it covers a lot of topics from the legal and regulatory requirements specific to community foundations. It also provides FASB requirement updates, tax reform, donor advised funds regulations, and everything from cash management, asset allocation, fees, etc. So it's pretty broad and it's very dense. And we recently started offering the course once again, and this year it will be in July in Washington, D.C. We also offer a CFE affiliates course. This is an online course. It's a 3-parter, and it provides an overview of community foundations and affiliate law. And it also covers everything from national standards compliance, fundraising for affiliate fund in cooperation with the host organization, and how to determine when a fund should become independent, etc. So it's pretty broad, and you can take the course at your own pace because it's an online course. And then next slide, please. Another community foundation focused program is the Legal Matters for Community Foundations. In the fundamentals course, we dedicate 2 hours of it on just on legal topics, and it's never enough. There are infinite number of questions that are very unique to each foundation. And so out of that developed our Legal Matters for Community Foundations. This is a workshop. It's a one-day workshop where folks get to ask all of their questions. They provide technical and practical understanding of complex rules and regulations and delivers on the most pressing issues and topics of the field. It is also flexible in that we usually try to structure the course with the different questions that come up with the folks in the room. And so it really does try to get to answer all of the questions that folks might have on how to administer funds, grants, and community foundation activities, and it's really unique to your specific needs. And for those, I believe we have 3 this year, Brad, and let me know if you want to add anything on Legal Matters.
No, you're good. Thank you so much for covering that.
Yeah, and also that course is led by the Council on Foundations legal staff along with Brad, and so it's pretty robust. And then I'm listing a few courses that Brad mentioned at the beginning. These are for all foundation types, and usually, and I want to say almost consistently for the next 3-4 courses, it usually has between 20 to 30% community foundation participants, and so it's pretty rich. The next one that we have coming up is the Leading Together Conference, and it's in 3 weeks. And it's usually for 800 attendees. It has different thematic tracks, but it has one track specifically that touches on philanthropic practice and emerging and best practices for domestic and global philanthropy on a number of topics. And it's a great opportunity for folks to get a sense of what's going on in the broader philanthropic field, be able to connect with folks outside of the community foundation field, but also to connect not just on sort of the best practice folks of the foundations, but also on different thematic areas and how different folks are tackling the different issues in their communities. So that's our conference coming up. One of my favorite programming that we offer is Career Pathways. This is a year-long leadership preparation program that advances excellence and inclusion in talent acquisition, management, and retention strategies. The goal of this program is to increase the number of candidates from diverse backgrounds in the leadership pipeline. For folks that are considered, appointed, and retained in senior and executive philanthropic leadership positions, the cohort is usually 20 to 25 people. Professionals and community foundations traditionally make up 20% of the cohort, and that's a percentage that we would like to grow. Some of the foundations that have participated in Career Pathways include the San Francisco Foundation, Charlottesville Area Community Foundation, Miami Foundation, Grand Rapids Community Foundation, the Denver Foundation, et cetera. And so it's a great program, and the year long it has 4 convenings in person and then several touch points along the way on online platform as well. We also have our Endowments and Finance Summit, and this is our summit that focuses specifically on the intersectionality between philanthropy, finance, investment, and policy. This summit is for 150-ish people, also has around 25% community foundation attendance, and it tries to bring folks sort of what are the new forces in the investment landscape, what are the new trends, strategies, and the new regulations, and provides a space for folks to meet on a yearly basis on this topic. And then finally, we have the HR Summit. This is a smaller summit. It's usually for about 50 attendees, and it brings together foundation human resources leaders and a focus on discussing or maximizing the talent within the different foundations and organizations, and provide innovative ideas for HR professionals that they can take home to their respective foundations. Judy, I'm gonna pass it on to you to talk about external opportunities.
Okay, sure. One of the things I'd like to say up front here is anytime you make a list of things, you know, those of you who are, it's common practice in our field to list donor names sometimes, you always miss a few. So this list, please know that it's not all inclusive, and I'll probably add a couple in here as we go on, because the more I look at the list, the more opportunities I see. So just like everything in the community foundations field where we can have death by opportunity, I'm going to chat for just a couple minutes about some of the opportunities that are external to what the Council on Foundations is offering, but maybe related, you know, in some ways to what the what the council is offering, as well as what other groups might be offering, just for awareness. And as I said, this is not at all inclusive. But, you know, the Council on Foundations, there's some related affinity group conferences, the ADNET group, the Advancement Officers Network. These are professional development networks that have, over the years, put together some pretty robust conferences on their own. And you heard Brad's down at the ADNET conference this week in New Orleans, and one of my staff members is down there learning all about the latest trends in development and, you know, networking with her peers. And frankly, that's one of the most valuable things I think she's going to get out of that conference is, as a new staff member, it helps to create the same network for her that I built 20 years ago by being able to participate in an opportunity like that. So she may not immediately come back with a takeaway from the conference, but a couple months from now, she may remember something she heard at that conference, and she'll have some people she can call to learn more. So the FOG, FAOG, Financial and Administrative Officers Group, is also having a conference this year in September. And if you Google these names, and if you can't find information about this, I'm sure if you contacted Brad at the Council on Foundations, he'd be glad to find some dates, or Daniela. CF United Conference is an interesting conference. They had one last year. They will not have the next one until April 2020, but that's a combined conference because a lot of these affinity groups, the Communication Officers Network, ProNet, Program Officers Network, previously held separate events. And so as a result, they're now having a combined event to try to get some economy of scale because these large conferences are pretty costly. In October of 2019, there'll be the Kansas Association's National Conference for Growing Community Foundations. And then Minnesota has a one-day event. There's a huge event happening in June in Canada, the Community Foundations of Canada National Conference. And then the larger community foundations recently had their own conference earlier this year. So as I said, just please know that this list is not all inclusive, but if we could pop up this next slide here.
Hey, Judy. Before you, you're fine to leave the slide, but I was just going to mention on the CF United. I thought it would be helpful to share that, you know, for many of you, that is one of the common feedbacks that we heard. The challenge that we had in the field was that when the council, you know, stopped doing the fall conference, the Fall Community Foundation Conference in 2014 was the last one we did in Cleveland on the celebration of the 100th anniversary. And so with the arrival of our new CEO, we've been talking very openly about bringing back the fall conference in a different form that it can be a financially viable endeavor. And one of the ways in which we think we can successfully do that is to support the group that is putting together the CF United conference. And so we actually are in the midst of a memorandum of understanding with them and getting the contractual agreements for the hotels to ensure that the council is a part of that team, because you're absolutely right. ADNET, and ProNet all bring their specialty and their lens to it to make sure that it has a programmatic, a communications, and a development lens. And what the council will bring is a more general lens of how do we think about this from the executive perspective? How do we think about this from the all-in perspective? And the theme will be power of place, and it will allow us to focus on what it means today to be a place-based institution leading community philanthropy. So I'm excited to say that the council's approach to the fall conference is to not overstep on all these other conferences that have propped up since the last 2014, but to look at how we can embolden them and strengthen them. And so coming in April 2020 to San Antonio, Texas, we'll be convening the CF United conference with the council being on one of those lead partners. So thanks for letting me jump in, but I thought that was maybe helpful for all of those listening in, how that plays out.
Yeah. Great news, Brad. Glad to hear that. Thank you. And some other learning opportunities. Right now, there's a variety of boot camps. I know we've had them taught before at the Kansas Association National Conference for Growing Community Foundations, the United Philanthropy Forum, the Grantmakers Forum. is doing a whole bunch of these all over the country this year in conjunction with the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. There's many other statewide councils doing these as well. So again, this is not all inclusive, but just know there's many different boot camp type of programs going on for new staff. There's also some other ongoing development opportunities through CF Leads, Community Foundations Leading Change. They have a variety of leadership institutes. And again, if you go to their website and take a look, you can find some of the more specific institutes that are being offered. CF Insights is a wonderful group. It's part of Candide now, which incorporated GuideStar as well. And there's just a knowledge center of knowledge there. David Rosado, who I think is on this call, is a great resource for community foundations. And I would encourage you, if you have something that falls under that purview in terms of needing research or insight in the field, to give David a call. Next. One of the things I noticed as I created this In Still More list is, there's a couple groups that are very worthy groups. I've just not been personally as involved, so I missed them in my initial list. I'd mention off the top here, Exponent Philanthropy, which is the former Association for Small Foundations, has a conference each year. It changes its focus every other year. So again, those of you that belong to that group could check out their website for the dates of their conference. And there's other geographically located groups like the Southeastern Council on Foundations and the Appalachian Funders Network, for example, just to name a couple of them that are having their own events. As you go down through this list, I'm not going to read all of these. You can see there's just a wide variety depending on what your training need is and what your strategic goals are for your organization. Whether you have some specific issues that you want to explore, whether you're particularly focused on a certain cause or a certain focus like international groups. So again, we've got this list available for you, but there's Grantmaker subgroups. If you Google Grantmakers for the Arts, you'll find a wide variety come up. And there's an incredible number of training opportunities also within your state associations and their various subgroups. So at this point, I would go on to talk a little bit about next. Steve, if you could help me here dive in and talk a little bit about the CF Express training program of the Kansas Association of Community Foundations that you and I have been a great part of.
Absolutely. Thanks, Judy. If you go to the next slide, CF Express really is a great online opportunity. And it was really, I have to give KACF a lot of credit for this, and Svetlana and the folks there, because there was really recognition that there needed to be something that, because particularly for smaller foundations that maybe they were geographically dispersed, that don't have the budget necessarily to go to a full conference. This is kind of a nice way to be able to get an introduction to the broader field. And really, this is, the modules are online, and they are designed actually both, as it says, both a basic intro, but they're designed, they could actually be used as a part of board meetings as well. And that's another thing that we all thought was important with this, is to have something that was 5 to 10 minutes long that you could use in a board meeting, show the board. There are actually some questions that appear at the end of each one of these modules that then give you an opportunity to have some kind of a discussion about a particular topic. And they really cover everything that a community the basics of everything that a community foundation does. So if you go to the next slide here, this can be done as a foundation or an individual. There's different price points given, whether you're a KACF member or not. You can be certified upon the completion. And as I said, it's great for board meeting education. Go to the next slide, please, the modules piece. So these are the examples. There's actually two slides that are full of this. So everything from what's a community foundation, which is the most basic question, all the way through investments, funds and fund accounting, variance power. Again, these are basics. That's really what this was designed to do. This isn't kind of next, the 201. This is really the 101 kinds of things. And really an introduction that I think actually would be a great thing to be able to take and then actually go do one of the fundamentals courses as a follow-up to this, or one of the conferences or one of those other opportunities that Judy was talking about before. The next slide. And then, 3 things to know about asset development, confidentiality. As you can see, it really opportunities for board members, particularly, to put the whole thing together, to understand how all of the pieces fit together. And I think that's part of what the CF Express training was designed to do, was to help give them the full picture of all of the different work of the community foundation, so that they understand kind of where they're trying to be able to go with that as an organization. And then the costs really are outlined on this, the next slide, which said $250 for individuals, $150 with KCF membership, and then the foundation cost. And particularly for those of you maybe who have multiple affiliates, this is a great thing to be able to use to be able to make sure that everybody's getting the same basic training. It's also a great thing for the foundation to have just at its disposal to both train staff, new staff that are coming on board, as well as any board training you might want to be able to do actually during board meetings or outside of it as well. The other great thing about this, because it's what they call asynchronous, you can do this at any time. You can, do them out of order if you want. If there's a specific tool that you're looking at or a piece that you need to learn more about, you can do that as well. So it's not something where you have to follow this set course to go from 1 to 15 and then you're done with it. So it can really be tailored to meet the needs of the specific individual or foundation. Judy, is there anything else I've left out?
No, I think it also, Svetlana issues a certification too if someone completes all of the classes, so it's on a personal level. So it really is something that I think people can take pride in accomplishing, because it does sort of help give you the broad perspective. Especially for board members, I think it's probably most valuable for board members who can't get to a larger training.
Right. Yeah. So we're off to the next, to the reinforcement.
Okay. Well, then the next slide, I believe, is mine, and this I think is really important. Brad, do you want to tee this up for a minute? Did I hear you there?
Nope, you're fine. Sorry. Please go right ahead.
Okay. All righty. Well, I wanted to chat, as an executive director in the field for 20 years. I'm glad we don't have a webcam on me, but before and after photos. But I've been with the Community Foundation for 20 years, and I think professional development is just absolutely crucial for all of our staff. And, interestingly, it's becoming more so as times change, because years ago with my generation, we had a lot of loyalty to the company just based on our expectation of longevity. And that's changing. And the people aren't staying with their companies as long as they used to. And millennials in particular, when they've surveyed that particular group, there's an expectation that their employer will care about their personal development. So it's not really an optional service for foundations anymore. It's really expected by top quality people that are coming into your organization. So I want to talk for a little bit about why this should matter to our foundations, and then maybe a little bit about how we accommodate it within our organizations, because we have a broad spectrum of different sizes of community foundations listening to this conversation today. And some folks may say, well, we can't afford to do professional development. And I would say to you, having built a smaller foundation, you can't afford not to do professional development. So next slide, please. The number one reason, though, we do it is because it really matters to employees, and it matters more to millennials than it did to the prior generation. And it's just a little bit of statistics, just so people realize how the job market is changing. People are leaving their jobs more frequently than they used to. There's another statistic not on this slide, though, that 1/3 of some positions, for example, our development staff, our fundraising staff, 1/3 of them are new each year in the field. So I see that when I teach the Community Foundation Fundamentals class, how many new people are in the field every year. So it'll help reduce turnover if people feel well trained and they feel capable of doing their job well. But it also helps people feel more satisfied for a variety of reasons. You can read there. But helping an employee be successful, I think, is the primary reason it helps people feel more satisfied. As I said, I have an employee at the ADNET conference this week. My goal is that she come back and having been at that conference, that not only has she sat through some of the sessions, but that she's actually talked to people and built her personal and professional network. Because I have to share that years ago, I had never worked for a community foundation before. I worked for the IRS, and then I worked in private industry for DuPont. And my first job here, I had never operated a community foundation before, much less ran one. And so much was new to me that attending the Council on Foundations conferences, attending the AdNet group conference, and some of the other affinity group conferences were the places that I gained critical skill and knowledge and where I built my network. So I think I just want to emphasize that. The other thing is that in our own communities, in terms of it mattering to employees, there's not, for many cases, if you're the executive director in a community foundation, there's not a lot of other people in your town doing your job in precisely the same manner. So I think from the executive director perspective, it's also critical in that you don't have a lot of colleagues right in your immediate vicinity generally who you can go to with a question. So that aspect of building a network is crucial. And the second reason that I think it's important, if we could go to the next slide, is that it's smart business. Your team, every team member on your staff is creating your public face of your organization, whether that face is good or bad. And when someone calls for information, the staff member says, I don't know that, the person who knows that isn't going to be back for a week, that's not a good response, whether it's to a grantee or to a donor. Whereas if your staff are cross-trained, if your staff feel competent, and if they understand that their knowledge is sound, they're more apt to feel they can answer a question. So I think as you think about your business, I think a learning culture helps to mitigate your staff build out, but it also builds your talent ecosystem. Because if one of your employees leaves, at least you've done some cross training, and you'll have a way to tide yourself over until you get a new employee trained and in that role. And again, I can't emphasize enough that having a knowledgeable staff is going to improve your community image, but it's also going to build donor confidence. While I'm on this call today, if we have a donor walk in and I'm not available to answer their question and our other development staff member is down at AdNet, if our office manager who's sitting at the front desk outside my door can't answer their question, they may leave. So if they can at least get a basic level of question answered by Rita, who understands how to start a fund, how to build a fund, and can set up an appointment for later, we are perceived as the go-to organization in our community for that higher level gift. So I think it's just smart business. Also, I think in terms of smart business is that a well-trained board makes sound decisions. How many of you have board members who were previously on boards of other community foundations? I would place a bet very few. Most of our board members come from other organizations. We pick them because they might be a CPA, they might be an attorney, they might be well-liked in the community, but there are very few board members who come to us from other community foundations. So we have to consider that if we don't train our boards in what is a community foundation and what do we do, they're just going to naturally make assumptions based on their prior experiences. Most of their prior experiences, just as an example, when it comes to raising money, their prior experiences for the most part are set in fundraising. They're not set in going out and friend raising and looking for larger gifts. So it's not their fault. They're going to be coming to us with a background of experience that didn't necessarily prepare them for the service for the type of organization that a community foundation is. So I think it's really critical to enable your board to make sound decisions and to enable your board to respect what the staff does, to figure out how are you going to impact, how are you going to measure the impact of your development efforts, and to understand that you have to take a donor to lunch every now and then or things of that nature. I think for the board members to understand the nature of the work, getting them trained is essential. So that number two reason, as I said, for all those reasons, it's smart business. But let's talk for a minute. Let's go to the next slide and chat for a second about, well, how do you actually make it happen? There's a variety of ways to make it happen, but we can start by simply letting our boards know what's available, why training is important for staff, maybe sharing with them that list of, smart reasons why it's smart to train our staff. In our case, we looked to find advocates for training when I first started a training program a little bit under 20 years ago, we had our personnel committee who annually evaluates each of the staff members, look for ways that each staff member could improve his or her skills, and then we looked for the appropriate ways to get that training. But most importantly, budget it, because like, we always say what gets measured gets done. Well, what gets budgeted gets done. And even small foundations can do this. You can find the money somewhere, or you could obtain a sponsor for it. But it starts with planning for it. And I think, again, if you set an annual development plan for each staff member, taking a look at where the staff member's strengths are and where the staff member could benefit from some improvement, then you can target the type of conference or the type of learning experience that's most appropriate. Maybe starting with the CF Express series, where you can expose the group, a bulk of the group, using the video modules, and just getting people used to creating a learning culture and creating an expectation. There's many different ways, as Steve talked about the CF Express. You don't have to go to a conference. You can use the CF Express service. You can talk to the Candid, the Foundation Center for CF Insights, and gather some research and knowledge to share with your board. But there's a variety of different ways to make training happen. We actually have a board training policy that talks about our expectation of training, and every year we do some in-house training, and every year at our annual meeting we put a list of who participated in training as a board member in the back of our meeting program, just so that we can show the board members that we take pride in the fact that we have a well-trained board, but also to share that information with our donors, to ask them to look at the fact that our board members are willing and eager to participate in any sort of learning that enhances their knowledge of how they can be a better community foundation. So I would simply say it's important to take a look at your individual staff members' skills and expertise and where they might use some training, but also to pick a starting point. Perhaps it's associated with your strategic plan. Make it a part of your strategic plan that all of our board members will participate in a certain level of training by a certain date. But what gets planned for and what gets budgeted is what happens. So that point, let's turn it to the next slide and talk about some common issues. I'm going to turn it back to you, Steve. Steve?
Yes, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure I was doing this part of it.
Okay, sorry.
You're fine, Steve. Yeah. This is Brad. You're good. At this time,
I'm sorry.
You're fine. Sorry. I just wanted to see how versatile Steve was, because my guess was he had something on the top of his head. So, thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left, and if there are any questions that you would like to submit, you can use the question box to do so. And we did have one question that came in, and Daniela answered it, but I wanted to share it with the group. And the question was about the CFE finance course. So those of you who might be interested in the financial administration specifics, that's a 2-day course in that CFE set. The dates for that will be July 24th and 25th, and as Daniela said, it will be in DC. And we will have registration opening up on cof.org on April 15th. So that is when you can take advantage of that. As we wait for, if there's any other questions from the group, one other comment that I wanted to make that goes along with, Judy, what you talked about in terms of budgets. When CF Insights did a assessment for CEOnet, which was a former affinity group of executives that has some supporters like you, Judy, helping to determine sort of its next iteration of being a group associated with CEOs, and it has shown up at our roundtables, at the executive roundtables that we've been hosting as a way to connect executives. One of the things that CF Insights found when it did a survey in relation to CEOnet was that CEO travel budgets, in regardless of irrespective of size of organization, is just not large enough to support the needs of today's administrative staff and executive supporters. In fact, only 57% in that survey indicated they had a budget of $4,000. And even larger foundations, which have assets over $250 million, were reporting still less than $6,000 associated with travel. And then when you looked at the budgets for professional development, as they stated in their report, it's even skimpier. The reality is we're just not devoting enough dollars to the learning needs of our organization, and we're not recognizing how things have changed in the sense that these types of opportunities are no longer being subsidized for our field. The reality is that community foundations have matured over 100 years to be expected to sort of sustain their own needs and operations. And with that, it requires us to continue to invest more heavily in those particular, just as Judy said, it's a matter of HR function. It's a matter of staffing priority. And so we're going to have to find ways to devote more of the resources to these types of networking and learning education opportunities. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm just going to throw out some of the questions that have been rolling in. We had a question about the HR Summit, and Daniela is taking care of that, informing anyone who might be interested in the HR Summit. Registration opens up on the 25th for that. And then we had a question about pointing to any specific resources for community foundations who are responding to disaster roles. So there's obvious talking with other community foundations who have had that experience, but what are the training opportunities for those who have experienced disasters? I'll start, and then Judy and Steve and Danielle, if you have others to add. I will start by referencing the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. So if you Google Center for Disaster Philanthropy, or as I commonly call it, CDP, they have an abundance of resources, including a playbook of how to prepare yourself for the inevitable, how you function when your office has to be closed due to disasters, how you launch your fundraising capabilities, and how you lean on the networks. I will also say that our team comes with a robust experience set of dealing with disasters. Myself and about 7 other staff members respond collectively to every disaster that hits and that affects our foundations. And I will tell you that last year we responded to over 26 that reached a level of significance, whether it was natural or man-made. So it keeps you very busy. And the reality is you do need the support of your partners who have either been through it or other partners such as private and corporate foundations to provide assistance in these types of situations. But CDP is one of the most effective ways that I know to learn how to prepare. Any thoughts from you, Steve or Judy?
No,
we haven't yet at my end had that experience with the disaster. So Steve, how about your end?
The one that I know, the one foundation is the North Carolina Community Foundation. I know they do some things because they've been affected by hurricanes the last 2-3 years. That they've done some work in that, but it's mainly anecdotal from working with different people. So I think that's the other part of it. And we mentioned this earlier, and I think that's a great point, Judy. Part of this too is about making sure that your network is in place. So when things like this go up, you've also got other people you can call on to say, hey, have you had experience with this? But I think that's a great, Brad. I think yours is a great example of a resource to use as well. For that.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add is that here at the ADNET conference, one of the sessions we sponsored, the council sponsored, was with Global Giving. And so you should maybe consider checking out Global Giving as another resource that's out there. It's simply because it's a platform that can provide, and they're a nonprofit, like the rest of us, a foundation grant maker like the rest of us, and they have provided assistance to many community foundations, and essentially providing the platform for how you raise money if your systems are offline, if you're unable to do so, such as the case of St. Croix and the Virgin Islands. And the other important thing is to have a partner. The Caribbean islands were able to rely on Miami Foundation as a mainland supporter. Puerto Rico was relying on Silicon Valley and Seattle for back office support during that. And so there are some circumstances where you have to lean on larger institutions, larger community foundations to assist you in just keeping pace when major disaster strikes. Also, one of our attendees, Svetlana, who is with the Kansas Association, who is behind the CF Express Online, she also referenced that there's a national conference or the National Conference for Growing Community Foundations that Judy mentioned in October will also have a session on disasters and acting regionally. So you can take that into consideration. I believe that's all the questions that we had. We'll be getting this recording out fairly quickly after this, usually within the next 48 hours, so that you have access to it and you can share it with colleagues and pull some of the slides for information. I want to thank Daniela, Judy, and Steve. I could not have done this without each of you. You are tremendous forces in the field, and thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for taking time out. I want to thank Russ Barrett at the Council for running the technology on this and dealing with all of us being in different parts of the country. Always a difficult task in managing technology across these different scales. So thank you, Russ. Thanks to all of you who joined us on this webinar. That's it for the Continued Learning webinar. We hope you enjoyed it, and please give us feedback and input as to how we can continue to be helpful and supportive to your efforts. With that, we'll close out, and thanks again, Daniela, Steve, and Judy. Thank you.